Think about how often you've been dragged into pointless arguments, battles of ego where no one really wins. The fool shouts, accuses, provokes, but when you stay silent, you deny them the very fuel they crave. Have you noticed it? In the middle of a heated debate, when you suddenly fall quiet, the other person grows restless. Their voice rises, their face tightens, their confidence cracks. Why? Because silence is not empty, it is a mirror. And in that mirror, they are forced to face themselves. You felt this before, haven't you? Someone insults you expecting an explosion, but instead you offer nothing. No anger, no defense, just calm presence. And suddenly they are the ones unsettled. They are the ones left scrambling for words. This is the power of silence, not weakness, not avoidance, but strength. A quiet strength the Stoics understood deeply. A strength that unsettles enemies, protects your dignity, and frees you from the prison of reactivity. In the next few minutes, you'll discover why your silence is often the loudest answer you can give. Part 1: Why silence makes others fear you. People fear silence because silence creates a void, and human beings have always been terrified of voids. In nature, silence feels unnatural. In conversation, it feels unbearable. Our minds are designed to seek patterns, to interpret signals, to fill in empty spaces with meaning. So when you refuse to react, when you sit in calm stillness rather than rushing to defend yourself, you place the other person in front of a mirror they did not ask for. That mirror reflects back not your weakness, but their own doubts, their own insecurities, their own unspoken fears. Picture yourself in a meeting. Ideas are flying, voices grow sharp, the air is tense with competition. And yet you do not hurry to add your voice to the noise. You wait, you observe. Your silence stretches over the room like a weight, and as the seconds pass, people begin to shift in their seats. Someone whispers internally, "Why isn't she speaking? What is he thinking? Does he know something we don't?" Your silence unsettles them because it suggests you may hold the stronger position, or worse, that you can see more clearly than they do. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once observed, "It is better to conquer our tongue than to conquer the world." He understood that words, once spoken, cannot be recalled. They betray more than we wish to reveal. A sharp reply shows anger. A hasty defense betrays insecurity. A nervous ramble uncovers confusion. But silence conceals all of that. Silence preserves your dignity, your inner state, your sense of command. And paradoxically, it often unsettles others more than any outburst ever could. Modern psychology confirms this. Silence in communication is never neutral, it is charged. In fact, researchers have found that even pauses of just a few seconds can spike tension in conversations. Most people experience silence as rejection, as judgment, or as hidden knowledge they cannot access. That is why silence so often feels intimidating. It forces the other person to wrestle with their own projections. Think of an interrogation room in a crime drama. The detective asks a question and then falls silent. The suspect squirms, fidgets, fills the void with nervous chatter, sometimes even confesses. Why? Because silence exerts invisible pressure. It exposes the human need to do something to escape discomfort. In everyday life, you can see this same truth at work. A friend tries to provoke you with a teasing jab. If you snap back, the game continues. If you laugh nervously, the power shifts to them. But if you offer nothing, just a calm, steady silence, their attempt falls flat. They are left to sit with their own words, and suddenly the joke feels empty. This is why your silence makes people fear you. It is not the absence of power, but the presence of it. In a world addicted to noise, the one who remains still is the one who controls the room. Silence is not weakness, it is confidence embodied. It is the quiet voice that says, "I am not desperate to prove myself. I do not need your validation. You will reveal yourself before I reveal anything at all." Part 2: The Stoic Principle of Mastering Reaction. Epictetus, the freed slave turned philosopher, offered one of the most liberating truths you can ever learn. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The world will always provoke you through insults, disappointments, or outright betrayals. Yet the wound does not come from the event itself. It comes from your decision to let the event dictate your state of mind. Think back to your own life. How many times have you reacted instantly, snapping at a colleague, firing back at a friend, or sending that angry message you later regretted? Each time, the regret did not come from what was said to you, but from what you let yourself say in return. Words launched in anger are arrows you cannot call back, but silence, deliberate and firm, is like the shield that prevents you from shooting yourself in the foot. Serena Williams offers a striking modern illustration in her career. She has faced hecklers from the stands, controversial referee calls, and moments when the entire media seemed to turn against her. At her best, she mastered the art of silence, not silence as weakness, but silence as strategy. Rather than arguing with every critic or feeding the frenzy with angry reactions, she often let her game on the court do the talking. That restraint, that refusal to hand over her emotional balance, is what made her not just a champion in tennis, but a model of psychological endurance. Her silence in the face of noise amplified her strength. It unsettled opponents, baffled critics, and inspired millions who saw in her composure a reflection of inner mastery. Modern psychology explains why this works. Reactivity is often a signal of insecurity. The quicker you lash out, the more you reveal that someone else has found your weak spot. Psychologists call this emotional hijacking, when the amygdala, the brain's fear and anger center, overrides rational thought, but silence gives you space. It engages the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reflection and control. The pause allows you to choose a response that aligns with your values rather than one that betrays them. This is what the Stoics understood. Silence is not a retreat, but a reclamation of sovereignty. When you master your reaction, you remind yourself that no one can truly govern your mind unless you grant them permission. You are not a puppet pulled by the strings of insult or praise. You are the one who cuts the strings, standing still while the world thrashes about. Your challenge then is simple but profound. The next time provocation finds you, whether in the form of criticism at work, gossip among friends, or conflict at home, pause. Remember Epictetus, the event is neutral, your response gives it power. In silence, you are not surrendering. You are standing on the unshakable ground of self-mastery, a place no insult can touch. Part 3: The Case of Angela Merkel and Everyday Life. Angela Merkel, who quietly led Germany for 16 years, was never the loudest voice in the room, yet she was often the most influential. Her style of leadership confounded those who expected forceful speeches and theatrical displays of power. Instead, Merkel mastered the art of silence. In tense negotiations with European leaders or presidents of great powers, she would listen carefully. Her expression unreadable, and then simply pause. The silence would stretch across the table like a quiet storm. Others, unsettled, felt compelled to speak more, to justify their positions, to concede ground they had not planned to concede. Without raising her voice, Merkel tilted the balance of power. Her silence became a scalpel, precise, disarming, and immensely effective. You may think such tactics belong only to the realm of diplomacy, but silence holds the same transformative power in your daily life. Imagine a quarrel with your partner, where voices escalate and every word becomes a weapon. If you meet each accusation with an equal counterstrike, the argument spirals, feeding on itself like a fire starved of oxygen but suddenly given more wood. But if you pause, breathe, and allow silence to enter, the rhythm changes. the other person begins to hear their own words bouncing back at them. They confront the harshness of their tone, the exaggeration of their claims. In that reflective gap, reconciliation becomes possible. Silence, paradoxically, speaks louder than shouting ever could. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself in his meditations, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. When someone is consumed by anger, cynicism, or malice, the greatest mistake you can make is to mirror their state of mind. By reacting with the same intensity, you allow their chaos to colonize you. But silence, chosen deliberately, acts like a mirror of another kind. It reflects their disorder back to them. In the presence of your composure, their rage stands out in stark relief. Instead of being dragged into their storm, you force them to confront their own turmoil. Modern psychology echoes this wisdom. Researchers studying conflict dynamics note that silence can de-escalate tension by breaking the feedback loop of hostility. When you stop feeding the cycle, the brain of the aggressor must recalibrate. Left alone with their own words, they often soften, realizing that the fight is not being matched. Silence then becomes a subtle form of emotional judo. You do not resist force with force, you redirect it until it exhausts itself. In practice, this doesn't mean suppressing your voice forever. Stoicism does not demand passivity, but conscious choice. Silence buys you time to discern whether speaking will heal or wound, whether words will clarify or confuse. Merkel understood this on the world stage. You can practice it in your living room, your office, or even in moments of self-doubt. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. So the next time you are drawn into conflict, remember Angela Merkel's quiet mastery and Marcus Aurelius's timeless counsel. Do not mirror the storm before you. Hold your silence and let the storm reveal itself. Part 4: Modern Psychology: Silence as Invisible Pressure. Modern psychology has a phrase for something the Stoics intuited centuries ago: silence as a form of invisible pressure. It is invisible because nothing tangible is being done, no argument presented, no words spoken, yet the effect can be profound. Studies in negotiation have shown that when one party falls silent, the other often feels an irresistible urge to keep talking. Words rush in to fill the void. And with them, unplanned disclosures. Psychologists call this the discomfort of silence, a deeply human impulse to cover gaps with speech. What seems like emptiness becomes an active force, bending the situation in your favor without you lifting a finger. Picture yourself in a job interview. You answer a difficult question calmly and stop. The silence that follows may feel heavy, but instead of rushing to fill it with nervous chatter, you let it stretch. The interviewer, unsettled, may begin to elaborate, explaining what they are truly seeking, softening their expectations, or even persuading themselves of your suitability. In that moment, silence becomes your ally. You are not passive, you are directing the rhythm of the conversation without appearing to. This principle is no less vital in personal relationships. If someone repeatedly disrespects your boundaries, the instinct is to explain, argue, or defend yourself endlessly. But sometimes, words only invite more attack. To say less or nothing at all is to assert a different kind of authority. Silence communicates with startling clarity. I will not argue about my dignity. I will not justify myself against the indefensible. The absence of words shifts the burden back onto the other person. They are left to wrestle with the hollowness of their own behavior. Psychologically, the mechanism is simple yet profound. Manipulators and aggressors thrive on reaction. They feed off your anger, your explanations, your defensive energy. Each word you throw at them is fuel for the fire. By refusing to provide that feedback, you starve them of oxygen. Silence in this sense is not weakness, it is self-protection. It creates space for you to breathe, to reclaim the inner stillness that others seek to disturb. Consider Mahatma Gandhi, a man whose greatest weapon was often his refusal to speak. During British negotiations, he would sometimes answer difficult questions with silence, his calm presence itself a challenge. The weight of his silence forced his adversaries to confront themselves, to see their own contradictions more clearly than any speech could have exposed. His silence was not retreat but resistance. It was, as Marcus Aurelius might have called it, strength under discipline. The Stoics would recognize in this dynamic the principle of control. You cannot govern what others say or demand, but you can govern when you respond and when you withhold. Seneca warned that anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes it. Silence is one of the surest ways to exercise that restraint, to deny anger the momentum it seeks. In practicing this, you discover that silence is never empty. It is a presence that reshapes the space around you. In negotiations, it becomes leverage. In conflict, it becomes a shield. In relationships, it becomes a declaration of your worth. Silence is not nothing, it is invisible pressure. And it is power. Part 5, when silence is strength and when it is weakness. The paradox of silence is that it is never neutral. It either strengthens you or diminishes you, depending on the spirit in which you use it. The Stoics were clear on this distinction. Silence chosen from courage and discipline is a mark of strength, while silence chosen from fear is merely another form of submission. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. His words suggest that silence must always be anchored in integrity, not avoidance. Consider the workplace. If your boss criticizes you unfairly and you say nothing because you fear retaliation, your silence is not noble, it is servitude. The anger festers inside and the respect you have for yourself quietly erodes. But if you remain silent for a moment, resisting the urge to lash out and later return with a calm, reasoned response, you transform that silence into strength. The difference lies not in the lack of words, but in the mastery of timing. True Stoic silence is never passive. It is a decision to respond later and better. Seneca warned that silence born of timidity imprisons the soul. It traps you inside your own unspoken truths. Fearful silence says, I am too small to speak. But silence chosen with wisdom says, I will speak, but only when my words can cut cleanly. The first shrinks you. The second expands you. In psychology, this difference mirrors the contrast between avoidance and regulation. Avoidance means you flee from confrontation to protect yourself from discomfort. Regulation means you pause, compose yourself, and then engage on your own terms. One undermines your agency, the other reinforces it. History gives us vivid examples of this distinction. Think of Rosa Parks, who in 1955 chose silence as an act of resistance when she refused to surrender her seat on a segregated bus in Montgomery. She did not shout, argue, or explain. She simply stayed where she was. Her silence was not cowardice, it was defiance. That simple, wordless act spoke louder than 1,000 speeches, igniting a movement that reshaped history. Contrast this with the silence of countless bystanders throughout history who remained mute in the face of injustice out of fear. Their silence was not power, it was surrender. This is the test you face in your own life. When you bite your tongue, is it because you are afraid to face discomfort, or because you are deliberately holding your strength for the right moment? The difference may seem small, but it changes everything. Silence out of fear hands control to others. Silence out of mastery keeps control firmly in your hands. So the next time silence settles over you, pause and examine its source. If it feels like a prison, break it. If it feels like a shield, hold it. The silence can be your cage or your weapon. The choice and the strength always rests with you. Part 6. The practical lesson: using silence in daily life. Philosophy only matters if it can be lived. The Stoics were not abstract dreamers, they were practical men of action who believed wisdom must shape how you move through the world each day. Silence for them was not an ornament of virtue but a daily practice, a way of strengthening your grip on yourself before life could pull it away. Begin with the smallest of provocations. When someone insults you, your body reacts instantly, your chest tightens, your heart races, your mind floods with angry replies. The Stoic discipline begins here. Instead of surrendering to impulse, you pause. Count to 10, as Marcus Aurelius might have counted his breaths while walking through the Roman palace, reminding himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. In those 10 seconds, the storm inside you settles. And what could have been reckless retaliation turns into measured choice. In moments of debate or negotiation, silence becomes a subtle form of strategy. People are deeply uncomfortable with stillness in conversation. Left with a pause, they rush to fill it, often revealing their anxieties, their motives, even their weaknesses. Skilled negotiators understand this instinctively. The one who can hold silence longest usually holds the upper hand. In this way, silence is not withdrawal but presence sharpened into influence. But silence is not only a weapon, it is also a gift. When a friend unburdens their heart, the temptation is to interrupt, to offer solutions, to match their story with one of your own. Yet often what people long for is not advice but space. If you can resist the urge to fill every gap, you offer them the rare gift of being fully heard. Modern psychology calls this active listening. But the Stoics knew it as something deeper, the discipline of putting your ego aside long enough to make room for another soul. History offers us luminous examples of this practice. Think of Princess Diana, known as the people's princess. What made her so beloved was not only her charity work, but the way she listened. Photographs often captured her lining in, eyes focused, mouth closed, giving her full attention. People who met her often said they felt as if they were the only person in the world. Her silence was not absence, it was presence. In those quiet moments, she embodied what the Stoics taught. The most powerful influence comes not from what you say, but from the space you create for others. The practice then is simple but transformative. Pause before reacting, let silence disarm in conflict, and offer silence as a form of love and connection. With time, you will notice a shift. Your words will become fewer but weightier. People will begin to listen when you speak. Precisely because they know you do not speak carelessly. This is the paradox of Stoic silence. By speaking less, your voice becomes stronger. Silence is a source of great strength. Lao Tzu's words, though not Stoic, echo perfectly the heart of Stoic wisdom. The Stoics knew that true power does not shout, it steadies itself in quiet restraint. In a noisy world where insecurity hides behind constant words, your silence becomes a rare act of courage and mastery. The next time you feel tempted to defend yourself immediately, to snap back at an insult, or to fill every gap with explanations, stop. Breathe, let silence do the work. In that pause, you are not retreating, you are reclaiming your dignity. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you always own the option of having no opinion. There is never a need to get worked up or to trouble your soul. That is the power of silence. It gives you back control over your own state of mind. So take this lesson into your daily life. Practice intentional silence. Use it as your shield in conflict, your gift in connection, and your steady ground in every storm. And if you found value here, share this wisdom with someone who needs it. Subscribe to Unshakable Calm, join this journey of Stoic practice, and leave a comment about how silence has shaped your own life. Your silence is not emptiness, it is your greatest power.